Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third installment of the Anash lecture series. A few quick announcements before we begin. First and foremost, a special thank you to all our sponsors, without whom none of this could be possible. I won't go through the whole list again like I did the first time, but you know who you are, and thank you. I do actually want to make a special mention for Peretz, Lukshin, and S Printing, who printed these flyers. They did a phenomenal job, and it had even better pricing. So I just want to mention that, definitely recommend them for all your printing jobs. Speaking of the flyer, if everyone could make sure to save the date for September 7th, where we plan to have the Crossfire event, which will have Rabbis Schusterman, Zients, and Bistritsky, and moderated by the high energy and always entertaining Rabbi Abba Perlmutter. And it's an opportunity basically to ask not personal questions, but all the questions you had about Judaism that you always want to know the answers to, or got answers that you didn't like the answers to. This is your opportunity that you can either email your questions in advance. We're going to send out an email reminder, or you could actually, at the event, we'll give out papers and pens, and you could submit questions then. And the key would be for the rabbis to give short, concise, which is always tricky, short, concise, 2 to 3 minute answers. This way we can cover as many topics as possible and have a very fruitful evening. People can start submitting the questions. You can see on the flyer, you can start submitting the questions right away at anash5777@gmail.com, and all questions will be kept anonymous, so don't worry about that. Tonight's topic, the pursuit of happiness, how to maintain a happy disposition during the wear and tear of everyday life, will be given by Rabbi Yitzchak Schochet. Rabbi Schochet is the senior rabbi at the Mill Hill Synagogue in London, which is one of the largest and the fastest growing synagogue in all the UK. He's actually currently the longest serving rabbi in the United Synagogue Organization. He's a much sought after international lecturer, and always a crowd favorite at the JLI retreat, which is actually the next one's coming up in a few weeks in Palm Springs. He authors numerous articles and is a regular panelist on the BBC show The Big Question, and he also authors a weekly column called Ask the Rabbi, which is very popular in different newspapers. And the Jewish Chronicle actually dubbed him one of the most outspoken rabbis in the world. There were once two brothers who were very wealthy and very powerful, but they were real Unterweltniks, as they say, real mafioso-type people. They were involved in every criminal enterprise, every shady business deal, but everyone was scared to speak out against them because they were so powerful and wealthy. And one day their town gets a new rabbi, and he decided that the status quo can't stand. And he would speak out against them and chastise them, and often open from the pulpit, he would just really give them a real chelik, really tell them off. And this open hostility went on for years. One day, one of the brothers dies, and the surviving brother goes to the rabbi, to his office, and says, "Rabbi, I know we've had our differences over the years, but I want you to officiate at my brother's funeral. And before you say anything, I also happen to know that the shul needs a new roof. And I'm writing a check now for $50,000, which should cover the roof and some, but I have one condition. When you eulogize my brother, you have to say that he was a mensch. Because it's very important, he was my brother, we were very close. It's very important to me that you say that he was a mensch." The rabbi thinks a minute, strokes his beard, says, "Okay, we have a deal." Takes the check, goes to the bank right away to cash it, and the funeral is set for the next day. The next day, the funeral home is packed. The word spread quickly that the rabbi is going to be running the funeral, and they all came. They want to hear, what's the rabbi possibly going to say at the eulogy? The rabbi slowly climbs the pulpit. He looks out into the audience and says, "The man that lay before us today, he was from the lowest of the low. He was behind corruption and bribery. He was involved in every criminal enterprise you could think about. He built his fortune off the backs of widows and orphans. In fact, there's not a single redeeming quality that I could think to say about this man. However, said the rabbi, compared to his brother sitting over there, he was a mensch. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me distinct pleasure to call up my mensch of a brother, Rabbi Yitzchak Schochet.
I'm 9 years older than him, which means he's waited the better part of 43 years to be able to say something like that. And in response to that very flattering introduction, I can only say the earlier part anyway, I can only say that I'm sorry, Sruli, that Mom isn't here tonight because she's the only one who would believe it. So the topic, the pursuit of happiness. I always like to immediately take in my audience, and the fact that there is probably at least 1.5 times more women than men here tonight suggests a tribute and a credit to you women, because it means obviously the men are inherently happy. But it doesn't say a whole lot of good for the men, and I won't go into that. The Gemara tells a story of a certain Rabbi Broka who found himself standing in the middle of a marketplace, side by side with Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, I don't know, as one does. And he pondered upon all the people walking around throughout this marketplace, reflecting on their various different statures, some astute-looking, others more boorish, and he asked of Eliyahu, is there anyone here who's going to go to Olam Haba, who's going to have a share in the world to come? It was an eclectic mix, and the rabbi wanted to know if there was anyone unique, anyone extraordinary amongst them. And Elijah responded by immediately pointing out to 2 brothers who were walking along. And Rabbi Broka became immediately excited. And he proceeded to run over to those 2 gentlemen. He was excited to encounter what he expected to be 2 very lofty individuals. What was their uniqueness, he wondered. And as he pursued them, he said, gentlemen, please forgive me for intruding on your time and quiet over here, but I need to ask you, what is it that you do? What is your profession? And they replied, we are jesters. We make sad people laugh. And when we see 2 people in a quarrel, we might use humor to make peace between them. Now, right there, within that story, at face value, we already see the power of simcha, the power of joy. These men, whom for all we know might be simple in every other way, but they made it their life purpose, they made it their life's mission, their sole preoccupation to make other people happy. And inasmuch as the rabbis famously tell us that everyone has a share in the world to come, which might require some process and some extra initiative and work on our part before we get there, these 2, they were guaranteed immediate entry. Why? Because of the power of happiness. Now, I'd like you all to do something for me at this stage. I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes and spend the better part of 30 seconds just thinking of 2 different realities in your life that might cause you to be sad. I'm not going to join you in the venture because it's 4:35 in the morning for me, and if I do that, I don't know if I'll open them again. But I'm going to ask you, close your eyes for 30 seconds, then think of 1 or 2 or 3 things that might give you real cause to be happy. Go ahead, do it now, please. Sorry, sad, I beg your pardon. Thank you. Told you it's 4:35 in the morning. Okay, now before you get too morose, I'm going to ask you to do exactly the same thing again, but now think of 1 or 2 or 3 reasons, or whatever it may be, that you have and that you believe to be happy. Go ahead. Okay, now I just need you with your eyes open to consider honestly within your own minds which one genuinely outweighs the other. And I maintain that with the exception of extreme circumstances, 99.9 times out of 100, the happy factors will outweigh the sad factors. And then you need to be honest enough with yourself and ask, well then, why am I sad? If you just checked the numbers on your lottery ticket and you saw that you won, I don't know, a $57 million jackpot, and you jump up for joy and you come crashing down and you break your leg, God forbid, in the process, how much pain do you think you're going to be in? I mean, even as they're wheeling you in to pin that leg together in the operating theater, chances are you'll be thinking about how you're going to be spending your winnings convalescing when you come out the other side. So why aren't we applying that same model to our own day-to-day lives? Yes, right now, maybe there are certain things that are getting me down, that might make me feel a little bit despondent. But what about the lottery ticket, the winning numbers that you hold in your hand? Doesn't the bigger picture outweigh the present reality you just went through the simple experiment? The reasons to be happy generally override the reasons to be sad. So why are you letting yourself become perplexed rather than concentrate on the greater goodness that beckons when you come out the other side? You know, there's a concept in psychology known as the negative bias, which suggests that all things being equal, we have a natural disposition towards negativity. Science will tell you it's part of our natural state, our biological makeup. But against that, there's also a theory in psychology that maintains what it calls the 12-second rule. That is, if you spend 12 seconds focusing on something positive, it will recalibrate your mindset and it'll channel you back in a happy and positive direction. 12 seconds. That's something that we Jews do very, very well. You see, maybe we go to bed all consumed with our worries and our anxieties at night. But when we wake up in the morning, what's the first thing we do? Moda ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam shechazarta bi nishmasi b'chemla rabba emunasecha. 12 words, saying them deliberately, thinking about the very gift of life, considering all the blessings in your life. 12 seconds, and you're good to go into the day. The Baal Shem Tov was puzzled about that aforementioned story from the Gemara, from the Talmud, about the two jesters, and he asked for an explanation, and this is what he was told. These two jesters, they were in fact really special people who were always able to identify within individuals that they encountered their origins in the higher worlds. And by doing so, any harsh heavenly decrees upon that individual were automatically annulled. But if someone was depressed, they couldn't make the connection. The sadness itself was an obstacle. It was a brick wall. So they would cheer that individual up with some jest and such humor, and some humor such that they were then able to make the necessary connections again. And what that really suggests is, as per what the great 19th century Rabbi Aharonaf Karlin famously said, sadness in itself is not a sin. But what sadness can lead to can be worse than any sin. In other words, sadness itself is not a sin. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, thou shalt not be sad. But it is certainly an impediment. It's a brick wall. It obstructs the inherent blessings in our lives. Not just in the spiritual sense, but every bit in the practical sense as well. Because inasmuch as there is blessing undeniably in all of our lives, if we allow for sadness to consume us and to override us to a point where we tend to ignore the blessings and we become utterly oblivious to the blessings, then frankly, that can lead us to places that even the worst of sins can't lead us. In other words, the blessings themselves, they don't disappear. We just mask over them with our own doom and gloom attitude, and then it becomes a real formidable challenge to rediscover them. The Rambam, Maimonides, stipulates that one who in his insolence, chutzpah, restrains him or herself from functioning in a joyous manner is a fool. Why a fool? Because a lot of things are inherent in life: aging, illness, death, losses of all kinds. But these events don't have to be the cause of ongoing sadness. Yes, these events, they do cause grief and they cause sadness, but grief and sadness pass like everything else, and they are replaced with other experiences. But it's your ego, however, that clings to negative thoughts, that holds tight to the negative feelings, and as a result, it magnifies and it intensifies and it sustains those emotions, denying one the ability to rehabilitate. And then you only compound the negative, and frankly, that makes you, says Maimonides, a fool. There was a woman who walked up to a wrinkled old man who was rocking frailly on a chair on his porch with a huge smile on his face, looking so happy. And she said to him, "I couldn't help but notice how happy you look. What's your secret for a long, happy life?" And he raised his hand weakly to gesture, and he said, "I smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day. I also drink a case of whiskey every single week. I eat fatty foods, and I never exercise." She looks at him and she says, "That's amazing. How old are you?" And he says, 26. You see, there are those people who wake up in the morning, they open their eyes, and they say, Moidani, they say, "Good morning, God." And then there are others who wake up in the morning, open their eyes, and they say, "Oh, good God, morning." The difference is one where you either despondently see every rose bush has thorns, or you joyously perceive how even thorn bushes have roses. On every Yom Tov, the Kohanim, the priests, they mount the duchen, the platform in front of the ark, in front of the Aron Kodesh in a shul, and they proceed to recite the special priestly blessing, the Birchas Kohanim. Why is this special ritual limited only to just the festivals, the Yomim Tovim? Because we have a principle of V'samachta b'chagecha, you shall rejoice in your festivals. During these auspicious times, we are invariably in a better state of mind. We are in a happier disposition, and that's precisely what makes us then more susceptible to receiving the blessings. Simcha and bracha, happiness and blessings, they are directly correlated. You cannot properly experience one without the other. And nowhere is this underscored more so than in a portion we'll be reading in the Torah in several weeks' time, a famous portion of Kisava where the Torah enumerates 98 curses that could befall a person, heaven forfend. It's always read just 2 weeks prior to Rosh Hashanah in order to give us a certain reality check before we step into the new year, but of course 1 week in between to serve as a sort of buffer. The question is, what offense could warrant such extreme consequences of 98 curses? And curiously, the Torah itself doesn't mention any specific sin. But the Arizal zeroes in on the one verse and the one pasuk in the midst of it all that says simply, "Tachas asher lo yavadto as Hashem Elokecha b'simcha v'tuv levav," because you did not serve God with joy and with gladness of heart. In simple terms, you're a good Jew. You're a law-abiding Jew. You're a mensch who does his or her thing and makes his or her contribution, but you're not happy. You have a restless heart. You're never really at peace with yourself, and you never stop long enough to simply smell the roses. You do what you have to do, whether in life in general or your Yiddishkeit, your Judaism in particular, but it's just routine. You don't really enjoy. There's no tuv levav. There's no gladness of heart. Chassidus tells us these are not really curses. They're blessings in disguise, and that's the point. God doesn't issue curses. The disgruntlement, the frustration that you feel in life is often entirely of your own creation. In other words, your self-imposed discontentedness blocks the arteries leading to a happy heart. And as such, if you are unhappy, then you're never going to see the bigger picture in life. then you're going to ignore the inherent blessings, and everything will essentially be seen or experienced in a negative context. The blessings are there, but you're not happy. You don't see them. You're consumed with negativity, and frankly, that is a curse. Why is it that somebody could be walking around burdened by life, and then maybe at a kiddush or at a simcha, they have a l'chaim or two, and in the moment, they're happy? Because inherently, we are all happy. My neshama, my soul, it's an extension of the divine. How can I not be happy? How could my soul not be happy? The soul sees the implicit blessings in everything, only life masks over it, sometimes with many layers, and undeniably with atzas hayetzer, the ideas that are put into us by our own evil inclinations, such that all I see is curses, all I see around me is bad luck. So saying l'chaim enables you to transcend that, even if only in the moment. It exposes a truth. It exposes the deeper reality within. We spoke about 98 curses. L'chaim is gematria, as the numerical value of 98. That's no coincidence. You can turn it all around. You've just got to figure out how to unleash the true you from within. And you know, when we consider the Jewish calendar, there are 2 months in particular that stand out, and in which Jewish law gives us particular directive on how we're supposed to conduct our moods. Adar constitutes the happiest time in the Jewish calendar because of Purim. Halacha, Jewish law, gives us a clear directive. When the month of Adar comes in, you should increase in joy. In contrast, we have soon coming up the month of Av, where we are instructed to diminish in joy. When the month of Av comes in, you shall diminish in joy. Why? Because of the 9th of Av, the saddest day in which our temples were destroyed and the exile that we endure as a result. Now, what is especially noteworthy is that even as these two events are diametric opposites, the Talmud links them together. Just as in the month of Av, one has to diminish in joy, so too in the month of Adar, one should increase in joy. What does one have to do with the other? What is the underlying link between the two? They're mutually exclusive. On one level, what we have to consider is how in the month of Adar, we're being instructed not to be happy, but to increase in joy. Similarly, in the month of Av, we're being told not to be sad, rather to diminish a little bit in the joy. In other words, joy is the default position. That's the starting point. You have to always strive to maintain a happy disposition. That's a given. It's just a question of how to manage or balance the extent owing to certain circumstances. In light of the uniqueness of the month of Adar, because of Purim, you increase, you have the added obligation, and in light of the tragic circumstances in the month of Av, you diminish somewhat. So yes, they are deliberately linked to remind us that inasmuch as the dates per se might be mutually exclusive on the one hand, the principal joy factor, the basic happiness, remains a constant regardless. And this is the point. Fundamental to Hasidic thinking and really to basic general Jewish philosophy is that you impact your reality through your very mindset. Man is always attached to the object of his or her thinking process. If you think negative, you become mired in negativity. If you walk around sad and despondent or downtrodden, then you become attached to all of that negative vibe. And then negativity in turn cleaves to you. And it becomes a downward spiral from there. To the flip side, of course, when you are in a happier frame of mind, then you attach your soul to all of the divine benevolence, which in turn will encompass you and it will engender goodness in your life. And that's why Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov, puts the emphasis on that aforementioned phrase and says, Mishenichnas Av, not Mishenichnas Av, when the month of Av comes in, Mima'atin b'simcha, you should diminish in joy. But put the comma a little bit further on in the sentence. Mishenichnas Av, when the month of Av comes in, Mima'atin, you can diminish the negative experience of the month. B'simcha, as a direct result of joy, of being happy. And the bottom line is this. There are circumstances that we confront daily, whether in our home life whether in the workplace or wherever else. There are Adar moments in our lives, and there can be, heaven forfend, of moments in our lives. But we are the makers of our own reality. We're the architects of our destiny. And it's the precise mindset, whether joy or otherwise, that will make all the difference. Now, too many people today are unhappy because life isn't meeting their expectations. But why? Why is that so? Is life really so challenging in today's world, or are we perhaps managing our expectations wrongly? Let's consider. There was a father who had two sons. One was exceptionally happy and positive about everything in life. Even the darkest day was bright. The other was always sad and despondent. Everything was black and bleak. Every opportunity was really just a catastrophe waiting to happen. And the father was determined to finally redress the balance a little bit. So he waited till the boys went off to school. And he ensured to go into his pessimistic son's room, and he filled it with every imaginable toy new on the market, thinking to himself, this will surely cheer him up. And then he proceeded to walk into his ever-happy sunshine son's room, and he filled it, pardon me, with a whole bunch of horse manure. And then he waited. And then the boys came home from school, and they go into their individual rooms, and he waits a few moments, and he goes behind the door of the negative son's room, and he hears crying from within. And he can't believe it. He opens the door. He says, son, what is it? He goes, Dad, all these toys, my friends are going to be jealous. Some of them are going to need batteries, which are going to run out. I have to read through all of the instructions. Some of the toys are going to ultimately break. It's just not worth it. And the father shrugs his shoulders, gewalt, and he figures, forget it. He goes to the other son's room, hoping at least there it'll have brought him a little bit down to earth. And he listens behind the door, and he hears the boy laughing away, and he opens the door, and he sees the son jumping up and down on this huge pile of horse manure, and he says, son, what are you so happy about? It's just horse manure. And he says, Dad, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. You don't need to change who you are. You don't have to change your nature. You just have to be in tune to it properly so that you can best nurture it in the right direction. When you condition yourself to be consciously aware of your every thought, of your every feeling, of your every action, and you're able to direct them rather than be controlled by them, then you can utilize even what might be perceived as a negative for something altogether positive. When you are true to yourself and you're completely honest with what you feel, with what you deeply value, with what you truly desire, then you can communicate your feelings wholeheartedly, both within yourself and with others, allowing your truth to flow through you into your surrounds and into your world. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a lifelong practice that requires commitment and recommitment, moment to moment, as you grow and as you evolve. It takes discipline, it takes courage, it takes determination. But every single one of us can get there because that is where we are ultimately meant to be. That's where our happiness lies. You know, there was once a woman who woke up one morning, she looked in the mirror, and she noticed that she only has 3 hairs on her head. And she got excited and she declared, I think I'll braid my hair today. And so she did, and she had a wonderful day. The next day she looked in the mirror, she woke up and she saw that she only had 2 hairs on her head. And she got excited and she said, today I'll part my hair down the middle. And that's what she did, and she had a fantastic day. The next day she woke up, she saw that she only had 1 hair left on her head, and she got excited and she said, today I'm going to wear my hair in a ponytail. And she did, and she had a fantastic day. The next day she woke up, she looked in the mirror and she saw there wasn't a single hair on her head, and she said, yes, today I don't have to fix my hair at all. Attitude is everything. You could see the challenges of life as an obstacle or an opportunity. Yes, a pessimist sees the catastrophe in every opportunity, and the optimist sees the opportunity even in the supposed catastrophe. There are 2 ways to see yourself. Either as a victim of your circumstances or your surroundings or your upbringing or what have you, which in turn will make you sad, or someone determined to recreate themselves, and that sense of empowerment will make you happy. Everyone has one of two stories, and the good news is you get to be the author. You choose which one to write. In the Parsha we're going to be reading this week, we talk about all the different encampments during the 40-year travel in the desert, when the Jewish people left Egypt. And one of their very first stops was a place called Marah. Marah, of course, means bitter. And the place was so called because we are told that the waters there tasted bitter, and in response, the whole people complained bitterly to Moshe. And immediately following this episode, we are told that God gave the first ever commandments to that fledgling Jewish nation, still before Sinai, which includes the law of Shabbat and Paraduma, the red heifer. Analyzing this story psychologically, what is apparent is that the Jewish people, they're a newborn nation. They're struggling with this newfangled experience of liberty, wandering aimlessly in this vast expanse of desert, and they're listless and they're lethargic, and they have no sense of direction, and they're feeling bitter. You know, notwithstanding whatever the tribulations they endured in Egypt, there at least they knew what to expect on a daily basis, difficult and challenging though it may have been. Now they're gripped by the fear of the unknown. And yes, sometimes a negative disposition can overwhelm a person to a point where it impacts on every dimension of the individual's existence. You could be so overcome with bitterness such that it can permeate the psyche, the emotion, and yes, even the physical senses. In the biblical story where Hagar was cast from Abraham's home with her son Ishmael, who's wilting away in the desert, dying away, and she casts him aside because she can't see him die. And then an angel comes along and reassures her, don't worry, it'll all be okay. I'm going to make him into a great nation. Then she opens up her eyes, and behold, there is a well of water. Let me ask you something. Did the well of water just then miraculously appear? Or was it the case because of her sense of despondency, she was oblivious to its very existence right there in front of her? Were the waters in Marah indeed bitter? Or was it the negative temperament of the people which resulted in every aspect of their experience looking, feeling, even tasting bitter? Some people call it the fox syndrome. You know, fox sees succulent grapes, which he desperately craves, but each time he makes a jump for the grapes, he misses. So after a while, he gives up in exhausted defeat. And as he walks away, he says, they're probably not ripe anyway. They're not really edible. They're most likely no good. They're sour. They'll probably make me sick. I mean, how many of us go through that experience? Many people, when they can't get the grapes suddenly become sour in their minds, and that in turn then becomes their reality. And so, Sham Samla Chok HaMishpat, then and there, in their negative state, God gave them immediately certain mitzvahs, certain commandments, in order to add a sense of purpose, in order to give a goal, new meaning into their lives. But I suggest to you there's something much more to it than that. There's something about doing a mitzvah, a good deed, or indeed learning Torah, that directly correlates with the soul of a Jew, such that even when he or she is down, when involved in something spiritual, it uplifts them. Most of us are aware, well, those of us who might exercise, that when we do, we feel good afterwards. The classic line, endorphins are released, is something that people like to throw around to sound smart without really knowing what it means. Here's what actually happens. If you start exercising, your brain recognizes that this is a moment of stress, and as your heart pressure increases, the brain thinks that you're either fighting the enemy or fleeing from it, and in order to protect yourself, the brain suddenly releases a protein called BDNF, which acts as a reset switch. That's why we always feel good or at ease, and things are clearer after exercising, and eventually we feel happy. The exercise itself is like a reset switch for the brain. And the somewhat scary part is it can have a very similar and addictive effect like morphine, heroin, or nicotine. The only difference, of course, is that exercise is actually good for us. Torah, mitzvahs, also serve as a reset switch. You know, there's only one time in the entire year when it is forbidden for the Jew to study and learn any Torah. Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, it's the saddest day of the year. We're legally bound to avoid those things that might otherwise generate joy. And one of those things is studying Torah. With the exception of studying certain aspects of Talmud that are distinctly said, all other forms of learning is outrightly prohibited. This in keeping with the verse that tells us, Pekudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamche Lev, the edicts of God are just and they gladden the heart. My father, Olav Shalom, wrote to me regularly during my first year when I was away from home, studying here in Los Angeles by my uncle. This in the days before email, 1983. Phone calls were still expensive. And in one of his letters, he wrote something to the effect of, I hope that you're happy. And if you're unhappy, then that's a sign that you're not learning properly, citing the aforementioned verse. Torah study, mitzvahs, all things which fall under the category of these Pekudei Hashem, the edicts of God. They are your spiritual endorphins. You know it to be true. You can sit through maybe a good shiur or an inspiring talk or whatever it is, a Torah class of whatever nature, and you tend to walk away feeling uplifted. We call it inspired, but that's really the spiritual endorphins functioning as the reset switch for our souls. Someone in a yeshiva once wrote to the Rebbe that he really couldn't get into his learning. It was an ongoing struggle. It was an uphill battle for him. So the Rebbe gave him a very clear directive. Open a sefer, a book, and learn for 5 minutes a day. Not a minute more. No matter what, close the book after 5 minutes, and that's what he did. And after a while, he couldn't go without his daily fix of 5 minutes, which then ultimately over time became 6, and over the course of time, a lot more than that. Today, he's a successful businessman, but he can't go without his daily learning. Yes, Torah learning, like morphine, heroin, or nicotine, can have a really addictive element to it, but like exercise, it's actually good for us. So reverting back to the Jews in the desert, we experience negativity in our lives. That's just fact. After that, it becomes a question of the extent that that's going to impact our reality to a point where everything becomes so disproportionately bleak and our whole outlook becomes utterly absorbed by the experience or not. We can choose to succumb to all the negative feeling that comes in the wake of adverse experience, or you can appreciate that your attitudes and your moods are your choice. Some people go through life happy the glass is half full. Others spend a lifetime lamenting that it's half empty. The truth is, there's a glass with a certain volume of liquid in it. From there on in, it's up to you. And you know what? After this place called Marah, the Torah says they came to a place called Elima, so called because there they encountered 12 wells and 70 date trees. You have to wonder of what relevance is this otherwise seemingly insignificant detail. They found some wells and some trees. Who cares? And more particularly, what on earth are 12 wells and 70 date trees going to do and help 2.5 million people? But after their spirits are lifted, after they're given an altogether different perspective, once God gives them mitzvahs and their attitudes transformed, they're in a better frame of mind that even the smaller things in life loom large. Even the trivial takes on significance, and yes, blessings can be sought even in the ordinary. Maybe that's why Hashem chose, specifically in response to their bitterness, the laws of Shabbos and the laws of Para Aduma. Because the journey from Marah, that place of bitterness, to Elima, that place where they encountered not very many wells or date trees, but stopped long enough to appreciate them, that journey is one which we often take in our own lives. Shabbos is a moment in time when, notwithstanding the difficulties of the days gone by, you can now pause to really appreciate the blessings in your life that you might otherwise take for granted. On Friday night, we sing first thing, Shalom Aleichem. We welcome the Shabbos angels. The Talmud tells us these are 2 special angels which accompany us on the Friday night. But those angels aside, there are other Shabbos angels who are with us. In fact, not just on Friday night. They're actually with us all week long. It's just on Friday night we're finally able to pause and to see them, to really see them, to thoroughly appreciate them. Your children, your wife, your husband, after a whole week of running and harrying with the worries of the world consuming you, You're able to pause, to breathe, to exhale, to finally open your eyes and see the blessings in your life. When Kabbalah tells us that Shabbos instills blessing into the days of the coming week, on one level, that's the point. It gives one perspective. It drags you out of the doldrums. It enables you to engage in the same experiment that we started out with at the very beginning of tonight. Not just 1 minute, but a whole 25 hours to pause and to appreciate all the reasons to be happy and weigh that up in balance so that you can recalibrate your whole approach, your whole attitude, your whole mindset and aspirations for the week ahead. And the red heifer, the para aduma, that was used for purification after having come into contact with loss and death. We take the ashes of a cow, which symbolized finality associated with death, and we mix it with spring water, which signifies life and the very real need to move on. You can't expect to prevent negative feelings altogether. And you can't expect to experience positive feelings all the time. The law of emotional choice directs us to acknowledge our feelings, but also to refuse to get stuck into the negative ones. You can choose to sit in perpetual sadness, immobilized by the gravity of your loss, or you can choose to heal, to purify your emotions by rising from the pain, by treasuring the most precious gift you have, which is, of course, life itself. Now, many people are going to argue that if only they had more of life's trappings, if only they had just more stuff in their life, and if only they'd be more successful, then they would be in a better place, then they would be so much happier. Sheer, utter gibberish and nonsense. You know what they say? Whoever says money can't buy happiness doesn't know where to shop. It also says love is more important than money, but try paying your bills with a hug. Contrary to popular belief, happiness does not come from fame, fortune, other people, or material possessions. The richest person in the world could be miserable, while somebody living out in the slums of a third world country could be perfectly happy and content. To be sure, there are a lot of people out there who'll tell you they're happy, and they might believe themselves to be, but if you look and scratch a little bit beneath the surface, you find them often so frustrated and so agitated and so discontented. And you know why? Because there's a popular saying: the happiest people don't have the best of everything. They just make the best of everything they have. You'll have a deeper sense of inner peace if you count your blessings instead of yearning for what you don't have. Or to put it in the famous words of our rabbis of Chazal, wealth is determined by being satisfied with your lot. Everybody works at his or her own individual pace, so why compare yourself to others? If you think you're better than somebody else, you're going to gain an unhealthy sense of superiority. If you think that someone else is better than you end up feeling bad about yourself. So stop looking everywhere else and concentrate on your own lot. You'll be so much happier if you just focus on your own reality. In fact, the more you yearn for what you don't have, the more discontented you'll feel, the more frustrated you will be, the less happy you will be. And ironically, it's precisely that which in turn will get in the way of you achieving any success. Because contrary to popular misconception, success is not what brings happiness. Happiness is what brings success. What does that mean? The Talmud tells us that some rabbis, prior to them giving a special class, would often begin with a humorous anecdote. And the significance of this would be, as Hasidism explains, simply to relax the heart, to open the mind, broaden the horizons. And when you are in that happier, better frame of mind, you function better, you absorb better, you think better. When the rabbis tell us, Simcha Peres Geder, that joy penetrates all obstacles, what they mean is that for all the things you believe that you cannot do, for all the obstacles that you create in your own mind, happiness enables you to transcend that, to rise above it. Happiness brings success, because when you are in that better place, you can then go on to achieve great things. So the bottom line is this: happiness is a choice. There are two types of people in the world: those who choose to be happy and those who choose to be unhappy. Real happy people are happy because, yes, they choose to be happy. They make themselves happy. They maintain a positive outlook on life and remain at peace with themselves. How do you define a truly happy person? What actually separates one from another? It's really quite simple. Happy people have habits that enhance their lives. They do things differently. For example, a truly happy person is someone who doesn't walk around always holding grudges. They understand it's so much better to forgive and forget than let their negative emotions crowd out all of their positive feelings. Holding a grudge has so much detrimental effect on your well-being, including increased depression, anxiety, stress. Why let anyone who has wronged you have that power over you? Simon Wiesenthal was a very wise man. And he recounted a story how he was in a DP camp at the end of the war, and there was somebody else who went over to him and said to him he'd like to borrow $10. He's about to do a deal on the black market, which, of course, was no chump change in those days. And he gave him the money. He said, I'll give it back to you within a few days. A few days came and went. A few weeks came and went. A few months came and went. He didn't see him from Adam. And then, after 8 months, the guy suddenly comes up to him and says, I'm leaving the camp next week, Monday. Here, I'm giving you your $10 back. And Wiesenthal says to him, no. You keep the money. For $10 I don't want, I should change my perspective of you. Wiesenthal was a wise man, but he made a mistake in that one instance. Why not let things go? If you set your grudges free, you'll gain a clear conscience, more energy to enjoy the better things in life. The Tzemach Tzedek famously said about how adults always like to hold on to their grudges whilst children always let things go, because adults would rather be right than be happy, and children would rather be happy than be right. You need to be happy in life, and in order to do so, you have to rediscover that child within. And even when you feel maybe life has dealt you a curveball, there's value in simply accepting the fact that life sometimes is not fair from a human perspective anyway. And when you accept that, you'll be more at peace with yourself. So instead of obsessing about how unfair you believe your fate to be, focus on what you can control and change it for the better. There was this elderly woman who was a spinster all of her life, and she was terribly bitter about it, such that when she passed away at the age of 97, she had one request in her will: there shall be no male pallbearers carrying my coffin. If they didn't want to take me out when I was alive, they're certainly not taking me out now when I'm gone. Happy people have the ability to choose their own destinies. They don't let circumstances dictate their lives and tell them how they should live. Being in control of your life brings positive feeling and a great sense of self-worth. And even when confronting problems that are real, challenges that are stressful, circumstances that are overwhelming, sometimes it's simply about asking yourself, will this problem really matter in a year from now? Life's too short to get worked up over trivial situations. Letting things roll off your back will put you at ease to enjoy the more important things that life has to offer. Because the truth of the matter is, even when one door of happiness closes, another one always opens. Our problem is we're always often staring with frustration at the closed door that we ignore the new door that has opened. Okay, so finally, here's the question. After all said and done, I still don't feel happy. I hear the arguments, they appeal to my sense of intellect, they make sense, but it doesn't change the reality in my heart. What am I supposed to do? 2 words: fake it. And you're thinking, why should I fake it? What could possibly be the point in that? At best, it makes me a fraud. Why am I going to look to delude other people? This is me. This is who I am. Why do I have to pretend I'm happy just for the sake of another? Didn't we just talk about being true to yourself? The straight answer is it's positive feedback loop. Chazal, our sages, make the point in Ethics of the Fathers and Pirkei Avos when they tell us how one good deed begets another. By definition, what you do impacts on your mind, on your heart, on your soul, whether you like it or not. Right now, you're not in the mood of doing a mitzvah, a good deed. Do it anyway. Don't let what happens to you define how you happen for others. The feel-good factor generated, not to mention the deeper soul satisfaction, will make you want to do another mitzvah and yet another one after that. to illustrate the point. In the earlier years, my father, alav shalom, said he didn't always understand most of the Farbrengens at the very beginning, the Yiddish interdispersed with Hebrew and Aramaic. It was foreign to him. His native tongue was Swiss and German. But he said he always enjoyed the Farbrengens. He always felt a deep connection, uplifted by them. Found a bond developing at these Farbrengens between himself and the Rebbe. And so there was this one occasion when the Rebbe was coming into a Farbrengen. And those of us who had the schus, who had the merit to be there in the Rebbe's presence and experience of Farbrengen, will recall sometimes how the Rebbe would have had a very serious look, carrying the burden of the world literally on his shoulders. And this is one such occasion. And my father said it was obvious the Rebbe was burdened with something, and that immediately, he said, impacted my own mood as well. And at one point during the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was looking in a completely different direction and suddenly swung his head sharply over in my father's direction, called him by name, and then said to him, Zog l'chaim und werd besimcha. Say l'chaim and be happy. Weil ob du wirst können sein besimcha, weil ich euch können sein besimcha. Because if you will be happy, then I will also be able to be happy. And then the Rebbe added, ob ich nicht kennen peil sein of dir, wie soll ich kennen peil sein of sich? If I can't affect you to be happy, how am I going to be able to affect myself? At which point, my father picked up his cup, and he said, L'chaim. And the Rebbe said, no, mir darfst du nicht tun kein Teufels. You don't have to do any favors for me. And then he looked for my father's uncle, my great uncle, Rabbi Chadakov, was the Rebbe's personal secretary. Chadakov, wo do der Chadakov? Where's Chadakov? Du kannst nicht peil sein, von Plemenike soll sein besimcha. You can't impact your nephew that he should be happy. And when he said that, the Rebbe, my father was tickled by it, and he burst out laughing. And the Rebbe turned around to him and said, It's sollst du sagen L'chaim, now say L'chaim. So I asked my father for an understanding of those words. If I can't affect you, this is the Rebbe talking, how am I going to affect myself? And he explained to me how on some level, again, we're all interconnected and we impact one another regardless of who we are. Sometimes, yes, you need to touch someone else in order to unleash something within your own self. Right now, you're not happy, but that doesn't mean that you should allow what happens to you to enable you to happen like that to another. Make the other person happy regardless. We've all been through the experience. You're feeling down. You're nevertheless go out of your way to do good for someone else, which in turn reverberates back on you. The Rebbe said, you're down because I'm feeling heavy. You then be happy, and that will make me happy. In other words, if I can make you happy, then that will come back on me. Don't let what happens to you define how you happen to others. When you reach out to them, even if you have to fake it, it'll come back on you. There were a group of disciples who came to the Alter Rebbe, and they complained about a certain man who was sitting in the zal, in the shul. How he's sitting there, and his talus over his head, and he's portraying himself to be the most righteous and pious of all people. And they said, Rebbe, we know what he's really all about. He's bluffing. He's faking. You have to go tell him to stop. And the Alter Rebbe pondered a few moments and then referred to a Mishnah in Peah, which tells us, if somebody pretends that they are a cripple or a blind or what have you, if someone mocks a blind man or a cripple, etc., then they will not die from this world until the same thing happens to them. On one level, the Mishnah is looking to teach us about the sensitivity that we have to have towards those disabled, etc. And continued the Alter Rebbe, we have a fundamental Jewish principle that whatever applies in the negative applies even more so multifold in the positive. So if somebody pretends that he's a cripple, he won't leave this world until that happens to him, how much more so when this guy is pretending that he's pious and a righteous man, he's not going to die from this world until that actually happens to him. Man is comprised of three components: thought, speech, and action. Our ongoing objective in life is to ensure that all three are in sync. Happiness is when you think, and when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. Or as the Chassid who once wrote to the Tzemach Tzedek and complained that it's difficult for him to be happy, to which the Tzemach Tzedek answered, thought, speech, and action are the three main parts of a person's behavior. Every one of us has control over what we think, what we say, and what we do. A person should strive, continue the Tzemach Tzedek, to think only thoughts that cause joy. A person should strive to only speak positive things, happy things, and refrain from speaking things that are sad and depressing. and act, even if it's not natural, with a full and joyous heart, to show joyous mannerisms, even if that's not how he feels at the moment. Ultimately, that will be his reality and actuality. Maybe right now your mind is consumed with negative thoughts that pull you down and deny you happiness, but when you fake it, the mind can be tricked and you can balance your life on that little hack. In the meantime, you'll learn what you need to do and you'll be able to turn that pretend happiness into the real deal. All it takes is just a little bit of nerve. We were born to be happy, not perfect. So right now you're not feeling happy, fake it till you make it. You're not being dishonest. You're just unleashing your true inner self. I'll leave you with this final anecdote. You know, they say that Yemenite Jews are known to live a particularly long time. I don't know if there are any here in the room, but there was one Yemenite Jew who walked into the offices of Sun Life Assurance, and he said he'd like to take out a life insurance policy. How old are you? I'm 64. We're sorry, we don't do policies for anyone over the age of 60. My father was here 3 weeks ago. You did a policy for him. He says, your father, how old is he? He says he's 87. He goes, impossible. Well, let me go check the records. They check the records. They come back. Yes, we did a policy for your father. I don't know how or why, but you know what? Then we'll do one for you. It's Friday now. We're closing. Come back next week, Monday. He says, can't do Monday. He says, why not? He says, my grandfather's getting married. He says, your grandfather's getting married. How old is he? He says, he's 109. Why on earth does he want to get married at 109? He says, tell you the truth, he doesn't really want to, but his parents keep pestering him. We all yearn for long life. We all yearn for longevity. Along the way, the journey you take from Mara to Elima, from places of bitterness to places where you discover the inherent blessings, that's very much up to you. So remember along the way that smiling is the way that your soul says hello. For every minute that you are dissatisfied or disgruntled, you're losing 60 seconds of happiness. And even if sometimes the good things come to a close, don't get too caught up in crying because it's over. Be also sure to smile and be happy because it happened. And above all else, remember that to find true happiness, you need to open your heart to love. Love who you are. Love what you do. Love other people. And perhaps most importantly, love yourself too. Joy penetrates all obstacles. It pierces every boundary. May we indeed learn to experience it in our lives. No, let me actually rephrase. May we choose to experience it in our lives, thus ensuring personal redemption and by extension collective redemption, because ultimately what we all yearn for, especially during these 3 weeks, is Simchas Olam al Rosham, real, ultimate, and universal joy for one, for all, for now, and forevermore. Thank you very much.